This is Leilani Cawthon, your host. I'm excited to be with you guys today. And we're going to get started with our panelists for this last hour of discussion and hopefully get into some really deep things because it calls for that right now. I mean, we're in a moment where we've had to do some mad dashing around in all the schools and districts in America. And it's time now to start thinking a little bit more deeply about what the meaningfulness of all this was and where it's really going in the future. So we'll have with us today Dr. PJ Capozzi, who's a superintendent from Meridian CUSD, their EduJedi district, Dr. Amy Hunt, who is the Chief Academic Officer from Park City School District. Excited to have her with us today. And Senator Howard Stevenson from the state of Utah, who's been doing amazing work and thought leadership around what software is doing today, and he'll be making comments as well. I'm going to make sure everybody is unmuted so that we can have them start sharing and start lobbing questions out. I think Dr. Amy Hunt, I'd like to have you do a little deeper introduction of yourself first and kind of, what's happening for you in your district as a general intro initially. Dr. Hunt? I think it looks like you're on mute on your side. There you go.
How about that? Okay, thank you for noticing. I didn't see the little icon. Thank you first for having me. I'm excited to be here. I myself am a Jedi, so I'm looking forward to sharing some of my thoughts today. My name is Amy. I am the Chief Academic Officer in Park City School District, which is a school district here in Utah. I have been in Park City for a little over a year. Prior to that, I spent most of my career on the border of Tijuana, Mexico and San Ysidro, California. So I'm experiencing two different scenarios. Of course, living on the border of Mexico and then now in a small resort town. So very different experiences. Just to let you know a little bit about what's happening in terms of education this year in Utah. We began our school year open for face-to-face learning. And additionally, the recommendation was that we work with families who were not able to or felt unsafe or unsure about being in school to be able to participate remotely. So it's been an interesting juxtaposition of running almost a school within a school, right? Where we have our more traditional face-to-face instruction, which we really are in a process towards thinking about how we might move towards more personalized learning. At the same time that we were providing remote learning and also thinking about how to make those experiences more personalized in nature. Currently, Utah's numbers have climbed quite a bit with respect to COVID. That's largely an issue of our universities coming back and having some outbreaks within our local universities, but it does trickle down into our schools as the community numbers rise. What we're finding right now is that COVID has prevented a really unique opportunity for us to have conversations in education that we never really had before. They were conversations that some of us were willing to have and wanted to have, and we're trying to prepare people for changes that we felt were necessary to be student-centered. But this particular pandemic has caused us all to say, hey, do we really want to be the Blockbuster of the world, right? Do we really want to be the Sears? Do we want to be that service-oriented industry that isn't able to see that we could do things differently and better and have the technology to do so? So I'm grateful for a pandemic, if you can believe it, to be able to promote and start talking about what is the continuum of services that we can provide for our students that utilizes technology in a different way to be able to teach and to learn.
Yeah, and I know your heart's in the right place with that, Bean. I've heard a lot of educators say the same thing, that, this is a moment we can take advantage of, because what we really want to do is be in a position to protect kids forever. We don't know if another thing is going to outbreak. I mean, we did have SARS before, Zika virus. We've had many things occur with our increasingly global running around as humanity, and now there's this. And it is an opportunity to look at our structure, our use of time, the provisions for space, You want to be remote because you're way out there in the hinter regions. Okay. We still have you included in everything. And, you know, that the disaggregation of the old line structure is a fascinating a continued discussion about how schools are having to mutate, but really where it's going. So I love what you just said. I want to call on Howard if Howard's ready yet to introduce himself as well. Senator Stevenson, are you ready?
Yes, I can introduce myself. I'm happy to be here. I always gain so much from these Learning Council conferences, whether in person or virtual like this. Utah, and by the way, I'm thrilled to have Amy on here because Park City is our star school district. They are funded better than any school district in the state, but they also have such a focus on students and success. In Utah, we have been really focusing on digital teaching and learning. We have the first statewide digital teaching and learning master plan that was developed through a consortium of our educators across the state, and it was passed by the legislature and funded, which enabled our schools to begin 4 or 5 years ago, if they hadn't already, to transition to personalized learning through use of high quality computer assisted instructional software, having teachers with the PD that they need to use the software with fidelity. And while it hasn't been done uniformly with fidelity across the state, we were at an advantage when COVID hit last spring. In fact, our state superintendent, Sydney Dixon, told me that she had been contacted by other states, state chiefs in other states, saying, how is it Utah is actually delivering so much effectively online? And she said, well, in part because we've had the training to use these kinds of digital tools in the classroom. And so mostly all that was needed was for teachers to learn how to do the same thing with a Zoom or other platform with students. It's interesting, I have 12 grandchildren, all of them in Utah, and I have been in their homes during COVID in the spring when 3 kids in schools from high school down to elementary in the same family, 4 kids in that family, 3 of them would be on a Zoom meeting with their individual classes separately at the same time. So that kind of shows you that the school districts that my kids were in, at least, were able to hit the ground running because they were prepared. They already knew how to assign students to use minutes on highly effective computer-assisted instructional software. And so now they just needed to add to that their face-to-face interactions with students online instead of in the classroom. And it's been thrilling to see that. I can't say that it has been perfect, and neither will the teachers tell you that, because there are frustrations. And one of the biggest frustrations is the digital divide. The fact that we still have 10, 15% of these students that, even though they may have a Chromebook to take home, they don't have Wi-Fi to connect with the Zoom classrooms. And so there's some limitations there that we're working to overcome. And with some of the federal money, I know that some of the school districts are using that to get Wi-Fi in those remote areas, and also in the homes in the urban areas that just don't yet have connectivity. Mm-hmm. When the time is right, I'd like to share with you some of the kinds of tools that our teachers have been using effectively, and how it is that they have been getting very significant results from those.
Good. Yeah, I want to wrap that in a few minutes. We're awaiting in a couple minutes Dr. Capozzi joining us, so we'll have him be introduced and also speak for a little bit. But I want to wrap back and comment on something that you just said, and maybe go back to Dr. Hunt and have her comment first on it. And that is the fact that what you just said is that Utah came into this having to only backwards engineer in the interface with teaching, which is the human side. This is a complete difference than almost everywhere else in the country, except for, I would say, maybe some of what San Antonio was doing, some of what Gwinnett was doing down in Atlanta, and Lammersville ISD out in California, and some of the other places like Classical Academy in San Diego. Most places have maintained, as they went through this, a structure of teacher centricity and looking at their distribution model as through the teacher's source of content with some adjustment of, pacing guide material, what standards are you supposed to cover, here's some ideas and that kind of thing. But really the same industrial age model as we've had forever, but you guys went a different direction. So Dr. Hunt, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the things that is unique to Utah is that there has been a long-term prioritization, as Senator Stevenson has said, around making sure that the right kinds of tools and the training associated with them were in the hands of teachers. So I can tell you that in Park City, where they've had a one-to-one, ratio in terms of technology for our students, for probably since 2008, right? And so our students have long had the opportunity to have devices that they were utilizing. Now, they weren't always going home at every grade level, but they had devices and were utilizing them. Utah, for example, has a contract for the entire state for every teacher and child to be using Canvas as an LMS, and had prepared in that LMS system a number of really well-developed resources for teachers to be able to utilize as soon as the pandemic hit, because they were already there and already being utilized in our state. So some of the tools that others were having to learn and try to figure out how to utilize with students were ones that we were already using in conjunction with our face-to-face instruction. Not only because it was the right thing to do to prepare students for higher education, but also because it was a much more effective way to be able to engage and help students to be able to learn. So as we went into this pandemic and emergency closures, it really did just become about organizing differently, right? And creating some expectations so that teachers and students understood what it would look like and when we would be interacting synchronously and asynchronously. It just became more about being able to organize differently, but it wasn't about having to learn the tools or figure out what we were doing next and how to transition to learning. It was just simply trying to organize better to be able to help everybody be able to accomplish learning.
That's great. And hi, PJ. We see you're here. I think you're the only one using a webcam right now, but that's okay, because you have an adorable backdrop. So thanks for joining us. Hello.
Hello, it's awesome to be here. I will gladly not be on camera if that's okay. I just didn't want to be the only one. So as I joined, I clicked that button.
Yeah, we allow cameras. We love them, but you don't have to use it. And one of the reasons why not to is that a lot of people do log in from home and their Wi-Fi is not that great when their kids are also hitting the Wi-Fi. Which
Absolutely.
Reminds me, the first question of the day coming in from Carrie Ann McClellan is first to Utah, and then we'll come back to you, Dr. Posey, to do a full intro to yourself and what's happening for you. Is does Utah actually fund the Wi-Fi for students at home? Dr. Hunt?
So Utah does not fund the Wi-Fi, although the grant that the senator was referring to is one that Park City has taken advantage of. Early on, we have we're close to Salt Lake City. We're about 25 minutes away from Salt Lake up into the mountains, but there hasn't been a lot of development here in terms of some of the development around Wi-Fi services. That's largely been a community decision around trying to maintain a rural atmosphere, right? But we do have a number of students that did not have it, and we immediately were able to partner with several organizations here to put hotspots in specific areas in our community to be able to make sure that students had Wi-Fi. And we are going to be utilizing this grant money to make that a more permanent opportunity for students and to target maybe some of those areas where new construction is happening that don't have great Wi-Fi yet.
That's great. And you know, the guy who runs the entire national program for T-Mobile lives in Salt Lake, Dave Bezant. So
Yeah,
he's got that 10 million program giveaway going
yeah,
on to get to 10 million. So I don't know where he lives, but you know, he's not far from you. So
yeah, well, and I just want to mention names. It was T-Mobile that came in
Yeah.
and provided all those pieces, and they've been very, very generous with helping school districts, not only ours, but others, to make sure there were Wi-Fi hotspots in areas that students needed them.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so we
they
have,
take
and what we've seen is that most school districts are using grant money for that purpose, because with COVID shutdown in the spring, it really highlighted the fact that there are some kids who are left behind through this home instruction, and so more and more has been done there. It's kind of been a good thing, as has been mentioned throughout this conference, that sometimes COVID has been a great blessing because it accentuates the deficiencies we have so that we can quickly address those, because those are the kids who need to be in education most of all. Some kids aren't going to miss a whole lot because they're already ahead and their families are taking care of that, but these low-income kids in particular are the ones that really need this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Senator Stevenson, I'm going to come back to you and give you the screen sharing, because I know you have a couple slides to share about what's going on in there in Utah. But let's go back and introduce Dr. Capozzi. Did I say your right name? I know you're one of our Edu Jedi. Did I say that right?
You did. You nailed it.
Yay! Okay, good. So tell us what's going on with you guys first.
Well, first, thanks for having me. My name is PJ Capozzi. We are Meridian 223. We are one of 3 meridians in the state of Illinois, which makes no sense, but we are in the northwest corner. So we are a small rural district of about 1,800 students, 250 faculty and staff in 4 buildings. So for us, we are in a hybrid model. Half of our alphabet attends Monday, Tuesday, half Thursday, Friday. The functionality of that looks dramatically different at K5 compared to 612. Probably the coolest thing that we've done in order to kind of bridge this and make it as effective as possible is we invested quite heavily with support from the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, as we like to call it in Illinois sometimes, in streaming equipment. So we have kind of state-of-the-art streaming equipment in our high school so that our kids can access the learning synchronously, and then obviously everything that takes place in the classroom with really high quality mics and cameras that will kind of rotate to where the sound is coming from. So it's more like watching a movie in some cases than it is having to just go from a solitary webcam, and then that obviously stores so they can access it asynchronously as well. So that's been our best success story in the hybrid model, but things are going fairly well in our district, and we're hoping in the next couple of weeks to be moving back to a full 5-day per week in-person model, assuming that our cases still stay low. So that's we're very thankful for that. that's
amazing. Well, great. Well, I think what we want to do for the rest of this conversation is sort of frame around what the future holds. Like you guys in the field have been seeing what's going on with your own transition, right? Like the hybrid, and you've witnessed the weak points, the strong points, you know, humans stepping up and being even more human in this moment of social emotional need, but at the same time, sort of, you know, going through the looking glass to the other side of how do we serve with lots of choice for both space and time, and then wrapping your head around a majestic sophistication level to logistics. So that sort of comes into the question. I think, Howard, you have a couple slides. I'm gonna hand it over to you for a few minutes to show us sort of where software has gone, because that sort of frames us coming back to Dr. Capozzi and Dr. Hunt as well, to talk about logistics, because I'm really interested in what your thoughts are for the future. So I'm going to pass that over to you, Senator Stevenson. I just have to find how am I sharing thing. Changing presenter, 3, 2, 1. Okay, you have the screen.
Okay, let me see.
It should be your little sharing bar.
Okay, is that
There
it?
you go. Yep, we see it.
Okay, I think you see a mess though. I need to somehow, there we
you
go. So, as I mentioned, we have had years of the legislature supporting local districts with digital teaching and learning tools. And I'd like to just point out one. One is the Upstart program for pre-K, which involves kids who are in 4-year-olds in the home getting the Upstart program at home. And this is the results that we get from the average kids who enter kindergarten. The red box represents what kindergartners should know at the end of the year. And as you can see, on the very first day of the school year, most of these kids, on average, are well into the kindergarten year, and some of them, well, on average, they're into the first grade on real words and nonsense words and sight words. So they already are advantaged that way. And these are typically low-income, minority, special ed, and immigrant kids who start kindergarten at that kind of amazing advantage. So that's one thing we've done. And we say, if kids can do this 15 minutes a day in the home as 4-year-olds, and by the way, these families all have free Wi-Fi and a computer and programming for the older siblings too, so that they don't feel left out. If we can get this kind of result from no teacher being involved at all, just 15 minutes a day with high quality computer assisted instruction, what could we do if teachers learn to let go of being the sage on the stage and instead allow the computer to do the heavy lifting of personalized instruction, so they can do the careful one-on-one and small group instruction that helps to fill in the gaps when the artificial intelligence isn't there. Here's the kinds of results.
Hold on just a second,
Yeah.
Howard. So I just want to make sure the whole audience know this is very bold, right? Like to even say those kind of things. It's like for some schools, and a lot of leaders in schools who've all been teachers, it's like when you say the words without the teacher, this is really scary, right? Like it raises hackles on people. But I think what I want to make sure we interject here before you go to the next thing, and is the fact that what's happening right now, number one, the single biggest thing the Learning Council Research Organization sees in all of the surveys, and we've done 4 big surveys, the last one had 27,000 respondents, is this one fact, and that is teachers are overburdened. It's too much, right? And so what we're seeing is like the shining, it's like taking a piece of coal and squeezing it and squeezing it and squeezing it, pretty soon it turns into a diamond. And one of the ways it changes form is that this starts to do some of the heavy lifting, which allows you to interject back in more teaching humanity, right, when social emotional is sort of skyrocketing. So I just want to say that. I'm just giving like a little bracket around that. So go ahead.
I'm so glad you did. And by the way, the State Board of Education was concerned about the social emotional, because these kids, 15 to 20 minutes a day, and they're sticklers on limiting screen time, by the way. And they also get parent support once a week from a call from somebody who speaks the language of that parent. So these massive numbers of immigrant families that are on this program, the parent gets the communication in their language, and they're given ideas for helping their children to be engaged, to read to them every night and that kind of thing. And so they get the component of parent efficacy training in addition to the students who have this really fun 15 to 20 minutes a day. And by the way, the fidelity use on this is above 95%, because the kids are enjoying it so much, and frankly they're getting dopamine while they do it because it's so joyful, and they know how much they're learning, and this is the results. But what I want to point out is that other professions, when they saw the disruptive technology attack their profession, because they were in a competitive world and they would go out of business if they didn't accept it, they did. And let me give 2 examples really quickly. One is accountants. They didn't resist the electronic spreadsheet, and those who did were out of business. And CAD systems for engineers and architects, they didn't resist CAD systems either. And yet we have a need for more accountants today than ever before, but they have been repurposed to a higher calling, just as engineers have been repurposed to a higher calling. And so my plea to teachers is, this is not to replace you. This is to give you the tools to do the personalized work that you have been unable to do as a sage on the stage in front of 30 kids. And so let me show you some results. We've had longitudinal results also, and as you can see, grades 1, 2, and 3, these kids who are on, and this is the Dibbles, who are on the Upstart outscored their non-Upstart cohort by sometimes 20, 30 points of proficiency on average. Even by 4th grade, there is this huge distance between the Upstart kids and the kids in the state. This is what our State Department of Ed did, because they wanted to find out what the longitudinal results were, because as you know, with Head Start, the gains dissipate typically within the first year. This has been identified by the National Conference of State Legislatures, by TED Global, and it was one of TED Global's audacious ideas, 8 ideas that can change the world. And it was the only one that they funded had to do with education. And so now, what if every child came to school on day 1 ready to learn? So what can we learn from our Upstart program that can be transferred to other classrooms? So Sonia Olson's 4th grade class, 38 students in one class, Title I school. It was a dual language immersion school, so she got half of her 38 kids in the morning and half in the afternoon. What happened to those kids who are mostly Spanish-speaking immigrants? Well, she asked me to come on the final day of school, near the final day of school, and give out the awards, because I promised her that she would get 90% of her kids at grade level if she used the software with fidelity. And what she said is she in order to get the kids the minutes, she said at the end of the year, we're going to have this celebration, and every Monday we're going to celebrate that everybody got their minutes. And they did. They were on there for the amount of time on this reading software that was needed to get them at grade level by the end of the year. But they got way ahead of grade level. She called me up and said, we didn't get grade level 90% as you promised, we got 95%. And the only 2 who didn't make grade level were special ed kids who made the biggest gains of all. This is the kind of excitement these kids had. And I've never seen more tears in an elementary auditorium as we did that day, as these parents realized their children's trajectory for success was changed forever. And these kids huddled around Mrs. Olson because they loved her. They knew what she had given them, not on her own, but because she was allowing the machine to do the heavy lifting of instruction so that she could do the careful one-on-one work. And here's her results.
I want to kind of speed that up so that we go back to open discussion, but I know we can all sort of see your screen right now. Okay with you, Howard, if we go back to sort of discussing this now? Okay, yep. So first of all, we've had a lot of companies come in like this Upstart thing, part of them getting behind a lot of what we've been doing and talking about, like, there's been Hapara on here, ACT, Tails to Go, Scribble was here, and then you've got, other companies that are doing sort of different levels of what the same thing is. I know our last speaker, Maury Pace, mentioned they're using Apex, and we've had other companies mention along the way, like, Bunsey and those kinds of things. Lots of different tools out there, right? So what we're saying here is the question of, what do we really believe the future really holds at the human scale level to switch this around so there's, number 1, higher achievement, and number 2, more humanity interjected in. And unfortunately, what Learning Council's seen in the numbers is that a lot of schools during quarantine transferred brick and mortar into Zoom. And that really doesn't work. So I'm coming back to you, Dr. Capozzi, to talk a little bit more about kind of like what you're doing and what your long-term goals are.
Well, I think my long-term goal, so it's interesting, my long-term goals for my district kind of revolve around three kind of pillars in terms of that apply to this. One is I want us to increase our rate of change. So holistically, I think we change quickly for a school district, which means that we change slow in any other professional organization. Two is I want us to become more interdependent. So I think that I think one of the great silver linings that is being missed in districts all over is that geography it no longer is an excuse for why students can achieve at one level 6 miles apart or 60 miles apart. We now have the ability to give kids a world-class education if we're willing to be interdependent and connect with each other in different types of ways. So my goal is to try to leverage the pandemic to again increase our rate of change, to look for us to be a little bit more interdependent. And then lastly, I think that as you just kind of referred to, I don't know that schools can keep up. So like the way I usually like to describe it is that schools change in a linear modality, whereas the society and the world is changing kind of exponentially or logarithmically. And I don't think that we can maintain the pace of change that the world is demanding of us without a significant level of private influence. And I'm not talking about the privatization of school, but I'm talking about private influence and partners that are going to push us forward, provide different levels of expertise and innovation. And so my hope with leveraging the pandemic, in the words of, Rahm Emanuel, never waste a good crisis. So trying to find the silver linings, those are the three directions I'm trying to push my district.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So it's good to know that you're in that mindset, right? You're going, okay, these are the patches that we have to do right now. Put the Band-Aids all on right now, get this, but it is going somewhere. And that's really what Senator Stevenson was talking about. We're going somewhere with technology that is about, I'd say, 7-10 steps up above where most districts are even thinking, right? They're thinking, how do I Band-Aid with technology? How do I automate existing structure but not change the structure? Which is an interesting thing to me. So Dr. Hunt, talk to me about kind of this idea of where this mutation is taking all of us.
Well, I think when you think about some of the things we were discussing earlier, when you're thinking about what do tools mean for teachers, right? A technological tool is never a replacement for the social emotional connection that happens between a teacher and a student. But I, can say wholeheartedly as an educator that a digital tool can do for me what I can't do, right? It can easily see those gaps in an effective way, and then allow me as a teacher to be able to then, understanding my student and understanding where the gaps are, put in those social emotional pieces, right? To be able to say, hey, you have a gap here, but let me work with your mindset to help you move to the next level, right? And that's really the value of what an educator brings to the education experience, is part of that social emotional connection. When you combine that with the really highly effectiveness of a technological tool, then really you can move forward more effectively, and I would argue also more quickly. I think one of the things that we're facing in education right now is that some of our adults are struggling to understand that it can be different. I don't think that it's our students or really even our parents that are seeing it can be different. We just tend to see things from a vantage point that's comfortable. And so I appreciate the things that Dr. Capozzi is saying around, needing to understand that now's the time to introduce change, to be able to give space for some different kinds of ideas. I had an opportunity to serve for a while in human resources, and one of the valuable lessons I took from that area was that until we're able to start thinking about the fact that not every class or teacher needs the same amount of time or FTE, and that the role of teaching can take on more facilitation, right? And really looking at data to think about what kids need and where they need to go next. And those shifts are going to be highly important in being able to start thinking about what a personalized approach to education looks like. And so I think that we have to do some work in changing the mindset of our educators around what it really looks like to use technology to do things more efficiently that we can't do right now, right? To be able to target instruction in a way that we can really personalize the experience of students having throughout the day, and that we have to give some space for adults to be willing to be facilitators of learning in small groups or in really in places that they haven't been before.
And I think you touched on something really, really important here, because the obstacle in the way of arriving at what Senator Stevenson was talking about, it's not necessarily people don't think it's groovy, they don't like it. It's that teaching in America for 150 years has been teacher as source of knowledge. They like to use the word tools. Technology is a tool only. It's not a distribution mechanism for knowledge, except tool-wise, right? It doesn't do the heavy lifting of actually teaching in their minds. It's a practice thing, it's a remedial thing. So the real leap forward is understanding that it's going to do some of that job. So what you're saying is get them into the mindset of facilitator. This is really hard. This is really hard, right? Because that's alien. And it almost feels like, you're taking my, no. Here, I just gave you 6 more things to do social emotionally because kids are at a distance, or half of them are remote and you got to run both rails and 16 different ways you got to deliver now. I don't know how we solve this. So I'm just saying that what you said is really true, but what we run into is this other thing. So comment, Senator Stevenson.
Yeah, as you're talking and as I'm hearing these amazing educators, I have to tell you, I am so inspired to hear them. I think of Bloom's taxonomy, that that foundational piece of Bloom, that bottom of the pyramid is academic skills and content knowledge, and that's where we're stuck on our national scores. Our NAEP scores show that 2/3 of American children are not grade level in reading or math. But if we are willing to let the machine do some of the heavy lifting of that personalization, then teachers are free to engage the students in the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, such as critical thinking, analysis, collaboration, creativity, and those kinds of things. And when teachers learn that they have more time for that, that they can explain why sine and cosine matter, instead of hoping that their lecture can instill the concepts of sine and cosine, but instead to trust that to the machine to do that personalized work, then they can explain how sine and cosine make possible moonshots, so that you can do that boomerang around the moon, and without sine and cosine you could never calculate that. And so it's just really exciting to think that when we learn to trust these tools to assist us in our task of delivering academic skills and content knowledge, we are then free to enjoy the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy with our students.
Yeah, that's why I liked what Dr. Hunt just said about, you're convincing them to be facilitators and having the role model. Like, now what are you doing? I think it's that simple. Like, maybe, right? Humans just need to know, what are you asking of me, right? The teachers need to go, what am I doing now? If I'm not going to do that, what am I doing? So back to you, Dr. Capozzi.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wasn't exactly sure the prompt they wanted me to dive into, but I do want to react to your last statement. Mm-hmm. I think that it's interesting in education because as educators, most people have 17 years of modeling. And in most cases, it's poor modeling considering what the demands in the classroom are. So we are unwriting a lot of code in their brain to tell them that they aren't the disseminator of all knowledge, and they don't have to they're not the warehouse of all knowledge, that they can inspire creativity and deep thought by leveraging different resources that are at their hands. This is not only is it a new skill for them to learn, but they are also rewriting the code of the modeling that they received for 17 years before entering their own classroom.
Yeah, I love the way you said that, because that is what's happening. And there's, obviously continued complaints about all the teaching colleges who are, way behind on all of this. But I love the way that you said that, because that is what we're having to do. And so this sort of put us in the moment of having to do that in a mutation for some things, but it's not really carrying the ball all the way into the end zone, right?
No, I think in some
Most
cases,
schools just want to go back to school and the usual.
for sure. I think in some cases, so it'll be very interesting to me to watch, like, sociologically, if this pushes us forward or pushes us back. Because I think there may be a revolt against technology simply because people are exhausted by the process of trying to implement it effectively at this point. So I think it'll be a great case study of the American public education system to look in 2 years to see whether people leverage the pandemic to push forward and to be innovative and inspired, or whether we fought through whatever we had to fight through in the given time to get back to normal and wasted an amazing opportunity to use as a catalyst to leverage our efforts forward.
Yeah, and that's going to be the winners and losers in this industry. Like Senator Stevenson was just talking about, like, accountants are not using the little hand calculator thing anymore. They're all machine oriented. And if a lot of schools do that, they will be marginalized. This is like all the research points to that. And a lot of the biggest districts have told me they've lost 4,000, 13,000, 40,000 kids in one of the biggest, who all went to other alternatives, because as soon as quarantine hit, parents freaked out. Some schools closed down entirely. They started buying digital learning like I've never seen before. It was already a market. The consumer side of the learning market was already spending $1 billion more than all schools put together on software. This is just the software. It jumped up an extra $1 billion in quarantine. So now more and more and more and more consumers have been exposed to the good stuff, like Senator Stevenson was just talking about, and they're going to be increasingly skeptical of not using that kind of value to take some of the load off the teachers. And if too many school districts try to go through this where they didn't take the load off, they just added to the load, they're going to lose their teachers too. So
I'd be interested. Superintendent, I just want to ask Superintendent, to avoid the exhaustion, are you finding that the exhaustion occurs because of misusing the Zoom classroom and thinking that they still have to carry the whole weight of their class on their shoulders instead of assigning some of it? Or are there other things to do with why some people are very exhausted from this?
I think there's quite a few factors that are going into it. I would say that this has been an emotionally charged time for everyone, between the pandemic, between the social unrest, between politics. So I think that people entered the school year this year in particular on a quarter tank instead of a full tank. So I think that people are finding themselves exhausted for their own social emotional reasons and their own self-care reasons, largely, in addition to whatever the challenges of the year are. But what I'm finding in terms of when we are working with our teachers, the way that I describe it to them all the time is that I feel like they're continually moving the goalposts on themselves. And so I think that what we haven't done, and when I say we, I'm talking about leaders and people in my chair, is really define what success looks like. And so without a true measure of what success looks like, I think people are constantly chasing it. And so once they, implement or master or become proficient in technology A, then they feel they're constantly moving what success looks like. And there's no threshold at which they feel satisfactory or proficient in terms of what they're doing at this point, just because it's all uncomfortable to them. And so what I find is that if I ask somebody what would be success 3 weeks into the school year, almost all of my teachers have crushed that goal. But then when I ask them how they're doing, they say not good enough. And so I think that the learning curve and the fact that we're exposed to so many things right now, and people feel like they're on the bleeding edge of technology, which we know they really aren't, but they are for them, is that they're recognizing as they're getting one step in that there's so many more steps to go forward, and that in education we are so far behind technologically that I think they keep putting themselves in different positions, in different stressors, trying to be a more significant player and a better servant to their kids than they are currently. And that continual moving of the goalposts, I think, is adding a ton of stress for our instructors throughout the country.
Yeah, great comment. Great comment. We have a comment we need to bring in, and then we need to come back around to Dr. Hunt. But Miss Maury Pace, you want to make your comment?
Yes, I think one of the things that is hurting teachers and the drive to go in the direction of using more technology is the fact that right now, and we also saw this in the spring, the companies can't handle the load. We are constantly having systems go down. We are constantly having updates that are then having to get teachers to relearn things without enough time to engage in that relearning process. Or companies don't have the support to be able to help individual needs. So one of the things I think is going to be a continued frustration in education is the fact that the companies right now, some of them don't have, even Google was down for like 4 days. So everybody that used any Google product, everybody that used any Google assignment within, whether it was Google Classroom or Schoology or Canvas, they had to stop completely what they were doing or anything that they had been providing for teachers. So, that's Google not being able to handle it. So a lot of our other companies, that it's a glitch this day and with one company, it's a glitch the next day with a different company. And so I think that's just going to be a frustration level point that I don't know how we meet that and be able to move the pendulum in the direction that I think would be really good for students and teachers of not having them have to do as much of the work. But when the technology fails, then they're the ones standing in front of the students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a really hard moment. But I will tell you, that's something as a leader, you're going to have to tell people it's always going to happen forever and ever in the future. Because software companies, it's going to always be a matrix of software, and somebody's going to update something and some other link's going to break, and there's always going to have to be a moment, right? Like when you're frustrated. It's just the way that it is. It's like when a parent used to come in screaming at you, right? There's going to be moments, and in the technology world, those are going to happen. I think they're starting to level up, though. I've heard a lot of discussion with the LMSs, but I totally understand where you're coming from, because then it sort of breaks people's will to live, right?
Well, and that's one of the things. I did have a couple of teachers yesterday that's what it did. They like, I don't even know how to continue to have to try to provide education in this way when I worked so hard. And then when it's time to deliver it, it's undeliverable.
Yeah, we're definitely living in a moment. But I loved what Dr. Capozzi just said, because, people living in the new technology reality, like all of education just arrived, the entirety of it. And the people that have been in here already for the last 20, 25 years, we've learned to teach ourselves everything along the way. And it's part of our, insides now. It's like part of our soul. Like we live this. We live constant change. It's part of the normalcy of society now. Right there, there's no firm schedule on anything, right? Couldn't get a hold of somebody, make sure we have the backup mobile number every time we book a Zoom meeting, because if the Zoom doesn't work, we got to be able to call them on mobile, right? Like there's just practices that will start to go in place. So I want to come back. Thank you so much, Ms. Maury Pace. I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Hunt. Your comments on what we've just been talking about. What are you seeing with the rest of this, the human conundrum and the machine conundrum going on here?
Yeah, so thinking back to where this piece of the conversation started, I think that one of the things that I've noticed in my experiences in education is that as educators, we have a hard time taking things off the plate. So instead of thinking about new ways of doing things and replacing maybe antiquated thinking, we just add to it. And so I think if we're thinking about what is maybe burdensome to teachers right now or burning them out in this age, is that they're not only trying to do newer, better ways of doing things, but additionally, they're also still trying to do traditional things simultaneously. So instead of really being a replacement, right, a better way to do things, it becomes just an additional thing to do. If we can help people transition towards thinking about effective practices as ways to replace some of the things that we're currently doing, it will help a lot. Because right now I see some of my teachers trying to do a lot of things through the use of technological tools that then they're also repeating in their face-to-face instruction, right? Not really totally trusting yet that the technology does what we want it to do, right? That it does do some of that heavy lifting. And if the technology is doing that heavy lifting, then we really should be seeing more effective practices. And eventually, education is a service industry just like other service industries, right? And if there are places within education that can create a more effective product because of the technology, those will be the places that we'll see families begin to choose and gravitate towards. What concerns me is that if we don't get this right, we're going to create an even greater divide between those who are able to experience and participate in that kind of modality and those who are not. Because surely there are talented people across this nation that understand that and will come in and create educational models where families will have choices and can utilize a different way of thinking about education. And there will always be those that don't. And I fear for a time that maybe public education looks like public school for only some students, and those who have more or have the capacity to work to get something different might be able to get that. And that worries me for the future of education.
Yeah, I just want to reassure you that that's been worrying us a lot at the Learning Council. And Dr. Hunt, Dr. Capozzi, as Edu Jedi, you guys are going to be wrapped into sort of a collab as Edu Jedi, if you want to contribute to this. But the idea of creating a space where the logistics are managed so that those things don't happen to public education like you're fearful of, Dr. Hunt, that's going on behind the scenes right now with Learning Council. We're working on that right now. We're trying to make sure that the consumer world becomes highly aware of what districts are doing, like districts become part of the matrix rather than isolated silos, which is what's happened. So you're going to hear more about this. I don't want to go deep into it. I want to sort of come back around to the logistics question, though, right? So if we can, have that conversation. I asked Maury this in the last hour, what was really happening with logistics, because she had done so much work on all the way down to the minutia. But I want to ask you guys as districts, and also for Senator Stevenson to comment on this. We think logistics and workflow, like log in here versus go over here versus do this, has a long way to go to be automated more to take the load off teacher. Because teacher distributing to 30 students, collecting 30 assignments back on every single thing is a lot. And that's the way it's built right now. So logistics and also the use of time, like Maury was even saying in the last hour, they've looked at cutting 30% of the curriculum load off of teachers because there's just no way you can do all of it. And I agree with that. So coming back to you first, Dr. Capozzi, what are your thoughts on logistics in the future?
So I think that if they continue to improve at the rate that they've improved over the last 5 years, that we'll be in a really good spot. I just think it's one of those things where I think if we take a step back and look at the growth that most districts have made, and some of the software support and platforms have made to even allow kindergartners with ubiquitous single sign-on and single access to multiple different software supports, I think has been tremendous. But I think that's been, again, a rapid exponential improvement in service in the last 5 years. So I'm very hopeful when it comes to this. I think that in many ways the logistics and the software capabilities are so far ahead of the level of which people are embracing them at this point, that by the time that we catch up to understand the value that it can add, I think that they will be ahead of us in terms of where the logistics are. So for me, on a personal level, in terms of my district, the logistics to me are, I am less concerned about than I am our ability to change our paradigm and mindset in order to move forward and embrace what could be at our fingertips.
Okay. We have just 2 minutes left. So, Dr. Hunt.
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree. I agree that the logistics concern me less, although in order to really do this correctly, we are going to need to be able to utilize a different way of thinking about scheduling, a different way of thinking about how students are being serviced in our buildings. I do also think that there's an opportunity when we're talking about the difficulties around mind shifts, right, with individuals, that we need to be partnering differently with our teacher preparation programs and really helping them to see that we can't continue to train teachers with the mindset of doing or performing the way we currently are, that we have to be thinking about helping them develop a mindset about their role and responsibility in utilizing the tools that we have to be able to do the heavy lifting and support them in being able then to dive deeper into learning, as well as to provide the context of the social emotional learning that can only be had through those interactions between educators and students.
Good, great comment. How did I get so lucky to have 3 such superior intellects on the panel today? This is amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, back over to Senator Stevenson, your comment.
Well, I just think that we need to provide a remote learning platform that teachers don't have to worry about kids logging in with multiple sign-ons and all of that kind of thing. We have to make this seamless so that the teacher isn't worried about all that minutia, that it works smoothly in the background for teachers, and that they don't get burdened, as has been mentioned earlier, by the weight of having to ensure that every kid can get on, that should be provided, and it should include assessment, learning management system, SIS. All of it should be one single sign-on, and we've got products that can do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree, and that's where things are really going. Is it has to go that direction. When I hear schools still worried about students having any access at all, Wi-Fi and all of that, they didn't get a machine because they couldn't get a machine. They're all sold out. That terrorizes me. It's just, you know, I get afraid for that, because it should be seamless. We should be moving towards that. Well, you know, we've had a lot of really great people as speakers throughout this last 2 days for the DC, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia folks. And we brought the 3 of you guys in as outsiders to give your perspective to our attendees coming in mostly from DC, Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia. And I hopefully they enjoyed it. They got to hear from somebody other than their just local districts. I'm really proud of all of you guys, Dr. Capozzi, Dr. Hunt, Senator Stevenson. You've dedicated your life to a valiant and critically needed initiative here with, you know, helping people think through what the future looks like. So thanks to each one of you. Thanks all of you for your help.
The award-winning Hapara Student Dashboard, a one-stop hub for assignments, announcements, and resources. Learners today have a lot of useful apps and technology at their disposal designed to help them achieve educational goals and enjoy learning. But there is such a thing as too much technology, and learners can become overwhelmed. Student Dashboard adds to the functionality of all these apps, Google Classroom, and G Suite, and puts them in one central hub that creates a manageable workflow for learners. It reduces stress for learners and helps them to build their organization skills so they can stay on top of things in school and later in life. Student Dashboard does this by providing a student-friendly interface that displays important due dates and upcoming assignments, which learners can access with just one click. It also gives them quick access to their Drive files and Gmails from their teachers. With Student Dashboard, learners no longer have to search around their drives for a file, scour Google Classroom for an assignment, or scroll through endless notifications in their inbox to find an important email from their teacher. It's all in one convenient, easy-to-use spot. Student Dashboard is a simple, mobile-friendly space designed with feedback from learners to keep track of their digital learning, whether they are at home or in the classroom.